Nobody feared the Mafia Boss because of what he owned. They feared him because they believed nothing in this world could ever reach his heart. But they were wrong. The first person to break through his silence was a little girl who was not even old enough to understand fear. The city knew Alexander Romano as a man who could control entire rooms with a single glance. Powerful businessmen lowered their voices when he entered. People stepped aside before he ever asked. His name carried weight across New York, a name built on influence, discipline, and an image that never cracked. But inside the walls of his enormous estate outside the city, Alexander was not a legend. He was just a man sitting alone in a room that felt too large. The mansion had 12 bedrooms, a private library, and windows that overlooked acres of perfectly maintained land. Yet every night, the same silence greeted him when he came home. No laughter, no conversations, no one waiting by the door to ask how his day was. Just the sound of his footsteps moving through empty hallways. 3 years ago, Alexander had been a different person. He had smiled more. He had believed that protecting the people he loved was enough to keep them safe. But after losing the person who meant the most to him, something inside him changed. He built higher walls around his heart than any fortress could ever have. Everyone around him saw a cold businessman, a man who never hesitated, a man who never showed weakness. Nobody saw the nights when he stood outside his daughter Lily's bedroom door, wanting to walk inside, wanting to tell her a bedtime story, wanting to be the father she deserved. But he always stopped, because Alexander Romano was afraid. Not of enemies, not of losing power. He was afraid of failing the one person who still needed him. That was when Emily Carter arrived. She was not part of his world. She did not come from wealth or influence. She was simply a young woman who believed kindness still mattered, even in places where people had forgotten how to show it. Emily had worked as a maid in different homes before, but Alexander's estate felt different from the moment she stepped inside. The marble floors were beautiful. The paintings were priceless. Everything looked perfect. Yet somehow, the entire house felt lonely. On her first day, Emily noticed something others ignored. Alexander's employees watched him carefully, always waiting for instructions, always measuring their words. But his little daughter watched him differently. Lily Romano was 3 years old, with curious eyes and a heart too gentle for a world that felt so serious. She would sit near the hallway whenever her father came home, waiting for him to notice her. And every night, Alexander would pause for a second, look at her, and then walk away. Emily saw the sadness behind that moment. It was not anger. It was not coldness. It was pain. One evening, while organizing the living room, Emily found Lily sitting quietly with a small drawing in her hands. It was a picture of 3 people holding hands under a bright yellow sun. Emily smiled softly. "That's beautiful, Lily." The little girl looked up. "It's my family." Emily looked at the drawing again. "Who is the person in the middle?" Lily pointed toward the tallest figure. "Daddy." Then she lowered her voice. But Daddy forgot how to be happy. Emily felt her heart tighten. She looked across the room toward the tall windows where Alexander stood alone, staring out at the city lights. The most feared man in New York had everything people dreamed of having: money, power, respect. But somehow, he had lost the one thing that mattered most: the ability to feel at home. And Emily had no idea that the little girl she was caring for was about to change the life of the man everyone else believed could never change. The first thing Emily Carter learned about Alexander Romano was that silence followed him everywhere. It followed him through the grand entrance of the estate. It followed him through the long dining room where meals were prepared but rarely enjoyed. It followed him even into the garden where his daughter Lily would sit alone, holding a small stuffed rabbit and waiting for her father to notice her. Days passed after Emily arrived, and she began to understand the strange rhythm of the Romano household. Everyone moved quickly when Alexander entered a room. Staff members straightened their backs. Conversations became quieter, but Lily did something completely different. She ran toward him. Every afternoon, when the black car pulled up outside the house, the little girl would hurry to the front door with a smile that could have brightened the entire mansion. And every afternoon, Alexander would stop for a moment. He would look at her. His expression would soften. Then something inside him would pull him back, and he would simply say, "Hello, Lily." 2 words. Always 2 words. Emily noticed it because children noticed everything adults try to hide. One evening, while helping Lily organize her toys, Emily found a small collection of drawings hidden inside a wooden box. Most of them showed the same image. A little girl holding hands with a tall man. Sometimes there was a sun. Sometimes there were flowers. Sometimes there was a house with smoke coming from the chimney. "Is this your dream house?" Emily asked gently. Lily nodded. "Daddy lives there too." Emily smiled. "That sounds wonderful." But Lily looked down at the paper. "Daddy does not like dreams anymore." Those words stayed with Emily long after Lily went to sleep. Because she knew something about broken hearts. They did not always make noise. Sometimes they simply became quiet. The next morning, Emily found Alexander in the library. He was standing near a large window, looking over the property while holding an old photograph. She did not mean to interrupt. She was only there to place fresh flowers on the table. But for a brief moment, she saw something she never expected. Not the powerful man everyone talked about. Not the person whose name carried influence across the city. She saw a father looking at a memory he could not let go of. Alexander noticed her presence and quickly placed the photograph away. "You need something?" His voice was calm, but distant. Emily lowered her eyes respectfully. "I was just bringing the flowers." A pause filled the room. Then she said something she normally would never say to someone like him. "Your daughter waits for you every day." Alexander looked at her. Most people avoided giving him personal opinions. Most people told him what they thought he wanted to hear. But Emily did not. "She is well taken care of," he replied. Emily looked toward the hallway where Lily's small footsteps could often be heard. That is not the same as being loved. The room became completely still. For a second, Emily wondered if she had crossed a line. But Alexander did not get angry. He simply looked away. Because deep down, he knew she was right. That night, something unusual happened. Alexander sat at the dinner table longer than usual. Lily noticed immediately. She looked at him with surprise, almost as if she was afraid the moment would disappear. "Daddy, are you staying?" she asked. Alexander looked at his daughter. A small smile appeared, almost invisible, but real. "Yes, I am staying." Emily watched from a distance as Lily began telling her father about her drawings, her favorite stories, and the little things that filled her world. For the first time since Emily arrived, the mansion did not feel empty. It was only a small moment. A simple dinner. A few words between a father and daughter. But sometimes the smallest moments are the ones that change everything. And Emily did not know it yet, but she had just opened a door inside Alexander Romano that had been closed for years. For the first time in years, Alexander Romano stayed at the dinner table until the candles burned lower and the room became quiet. It was a small change, something most people would never notice. But Emily Carter noticed everything. She noticed the way Lily smiled when her father listened. She noticed the way Alexander looked surprised every time his daughter reached for his hand. And she noticed the way he seemed almost afraid of happiness, as if he did not trust it to stay. The following days felt different inside the Romano estate. The mansion was still large. The walls were still covered with expensive paintings. The floors still reflected the golden light from the chandeliers. But something had changed. There was warmth in places where there had only been silence before. Lily started leaving little drawings on Alexander's desk. Sometimes they were pictures of flowers. Sometimes they were pictures of their family. And every time Alexander found one, he kept it carefully instead of putting it away. Emily watched the transformation quietly. She never tried to force him to become someone else. She simply reminded him of the person he had always been underneath the walls he built around himself. One afternoon, Emily found Lily sitting near the library door, holding a book in her hands. "Can you read this with me?" Lily asked. Emily smiled and sat beside her. Of course. They had just started reading when Alexander appeared in the doorway. He stopped when he saw them. For a moment, he looked like someone standing outside a world he wanted to enter but did not know how. Lily looked up immediately. "Daddy, come sit with us." Alexander hesitated. That hesitation said more than words ever could. This was a man who could make important decisions without fear. Yet sitting beside his own daughter felt like the hardest thing he had ever done. Emily gently closed the book and moved aside. "I think Lily saved a place for you." Alexander looked at the empty space beside them. Then slowly, he walked forward and sat down. Lily leaned against him while Emily continued reading. For a few minutes, there was no business. No expectations. No pressure. Just a father listening to a story with his daughter. Later that evening, Emily found Alexander alone in the hallway. The same hallway where he once looked like a stranger in his own home. But now there was something different in his eyes. "Thank you," he said quietly. Emily looked surprised. "For what?" Alexander glanced toward Lily's room. "For reminding me that she does not need a perfect father. She just needs me." Emily smiled softly. "Children do not look for perfection. They look for love." Alexander looked down, thinking about those words. He had spent years believing protection meant keeping everyone at a distance. He thought being strong meant never showing emotion. But Lily had shown him something he had forgotten. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is open their heart again. That night, Alexander walked to his daughter's room before leaving for the evening. He stood at the doorway for a moment. Then Lily opened her eyes. "Daddy," she whispered. Alexander smiled. "I just wanted to say good night." A small smile appeared on Lily's face. "Good night, Daddy." And for the first time in a very long time, Alexander walked away feeling like he belonged somewhere. But neither he nor Emily knew that the quiet change inside the mansion had already been noticed. Because when a man who had spent years hiding his heart finally started to care again, the people around him began to wonder what had caused the change. And soon, everyone would discover that the most powerful thing about Alexander Romano was not the influence he held. It was the family he was learning to protect. The change inside the Romano estate did not happen overnight. It happened in small moments that almost nobody noticed. A longer conversation at breakfast. A smile that appeared before disappearing. A father who started learning the little details about his daughter's world. But for Emily Carter, those small moments meant everything. She had seen people with money, influence, and beautiful homes still carry invisible sadness. Alexander Romano was no different. The world saw a man who had everything. Emily saw a father who was trying to find his way back to the person he used to be. One morning, while preparing breakfast, Emily watched Lily carefully place a small plate in front of her father. "I made it for you," Lily said proudly. Alexander looked down at the slightly uneven arrangement of fruit and smiled. It was not the polished expression he showed in business meetings. It was real. "Thank you, Lily. This is the best breakfast I have had." Lily's eyes brightened. "Really?" Alexander nodded. "Really?" Emily looked away for a moment, giving them privacy. She knew something important was happening. A connection that had been missing for years was slowly returning. Later that afternoon, Alexander found Emily organizing books in the library. He stood near the doorway, quiet for several seconds before speaking. "You seem to understand my daughter very well." Emily turned toward him. "She is easy to understand. She tells people what she feels." Alexander gave a small, thoughtful smile. "I used to think I understood everything about people." Emily placed a book back on the shelf. "And now," he looked toward the window, "now I realize I spent a long time not understanding myself." Those words surprised Emily. Alexander was not someone who admitted uncertainty. He carried himself like a person who always had the answer. But behind that confidence was a man still trying to understand his own emotions. "Lily does not need you to be someone everyone respects," Emily said gently. "She just needs you to be her father." Alexander looked at her, and for a moment, there was no distance between them. No title, no reputation, just two people talking honestly. "You are not afraid of me," he said. Emily paused. "Should I be?" A quiet silence filled the room. Then Alexander looked down and smiled slightly. "Most people are." Emily shook her head. "I think most people only see what is in front of them. They do not always look deeper." Those words stayed with him. Because for years, everyone had seen the same thing. The powerful man. The person who never showed uncertainty. The person who never needed anyone. But Emily saw something different. She saw the man who kept every drawing his daughter gave him. The man who listened when Lily spoke. The man who stood outside a bedroom door because he was afraid he would not be enough. That evening, Alexander sat beside Lily while she drew another picture. This time, she handed it to him immediately. "It is for you, Daddy." Alexander looked at the paper. It showed 3 people standing together under a bright sky. He held it carefully. "Who are these people?" Lily smiled. "Me, you, and Emily." Alexander looked at the drawing for a long moment. He did not say anything. But Emily, standing nearby, saw the emotion in his eyes. It was the first time she realized something. Alexander Romano was not afraid of losing his power. He was afraid of losing the people who made him feel human again. And that was the one truth he had spent years trying to hide. The days that followed became something Alexander Romano never expected to experience again. Ordinary moments. Simple conversations. Small memories that did not involve meetings. decisions, or responsibilities. For years, his life had been measured by schedules and obligations. Every hour had a purpose. Every choice had a consequence. But now, he found himself remembering things that had nothing to do with power. He remembered the way Lily laughed when she tried to teach him how to draw flowers. He remembered the way she held his hand when they walked through the garden. He remembered the way Emily Carter smiled whenever she saw him trying to become a better father. The mansion was slowly becoming a home, and Alexander was beginning to understand that a home was not built with expensive furniture or beautiful rooms. It was built with people who made you feel like you belonged. Emily noticed the difference too. The man who once walked through the estate like he was carrying the weight of the entire world now stopped to listen. He asked Lily about her day. He sat with her during breakfast. He even learned the names of her favorite storybooks because he wanted to read them with her at night. It was not perfect. There were still moments when Alexander became quiet. Moments when old memories made him distant. But Emily understood that healing was not something that happened all at once. Sometimes it happened one small step at a time. One evening, Emily found Alexander in the kitchen. It was unusual because he rarely spent time there. He was standing beside the counter, looking at a small recipe card Lily had decorated with colorful drawings. She wanted to make cookies tomorrow, Alexander explained. Emily smiled. And you are helping her? He looked slightly embarrassed. I promised I would. Emily could not help but smile. That is something I never thought I would see. Alexander looked at the card again. Neither did I. There was a quiet honesty in his voice. I spent so much time believing I had to be strong for everyone else that I forgot I was allowed to be human. Emily looked at him carefully. Being human is not weakness. Alexander looked at her, and those words seemed to reach a place inside him that few people had ever seen. The next morning, the kitchen was filled with something that had been missing for years. Laughter. Lily stood on a chair, carefully mixing ingredients while Alexander tried to follow her instructions. Emily watched as the most intimidating man in the city listened seriously to a 3-year-old explaining how much chocolate belonged in a cookie recipe. It was a scene nobody would have believed if they had seen the old Alexander Romano. But this was the man standing in front of her now. Not a symbol, not a reputation, just a father trying his best. Later that afternoon, Alexander found Emily in the garden. I want to thank you, he said. Emily looked at him. For what? He glanced toward the house where Lily was waiting. For showing me that I was not too late. Emily felt those words deeply, because she knew Alexander was not talking about becoming a different person. He was talking about finding the person he had lost. But as their lives became closer, a question remained hidden beneath the happiness they had created. Could a man who spent years protecting his heart truly allow himself to love his new family without fear? And would the world around him accept the change that was happening inside the walls of the Romano estate? The Romano estate had become a place Emily Carter barely recognized. A few months earlier, the halls had felt cold and distant, like every room was waiting for someone who would never return. Now, the sound of Lily's laughter traveled through the house like sunlight. It was a small thing, a simple sound, but for Alexander Romano, it meant more than anyone could understand. He had spent years believing that happiness was something fragile, something that disappeared the moment you allowed yourself to believe in it. But Lily had changed that. Emily had changed that. And for the first time in a long time, Alexander allowed himself to imagine a future beyond the responsibilities that had controlled his entire life. But change never happened without consequences. People who had known the old Alexander noticed the difference. His employees noticed that he spent less time locked away in his office. His friends noticed that he smiled more often. Even the people closest to him began asking questions about the woman who had brought warmth back into his home. Emily never wanted attention. She never asked for recognition. She simply cared about Lily and treated Alexander like a person instead of a name. That was exactly why he respected her. One afternoon, Emily found Alexander sitting in the garden while Lily played nearby. He looked peaceful, something she had never seen before. You look different, Emily said. Alexander looked up with a slight smile. Different how? Like you are finally breathing. He looked toward Lily. Maybe I am. For a moment, they sat quietly. The garden was calm, the afternoon light falling across the flowers around them. It felt like a normal family moment, something Alexander never thought he would have again. But later that evening, everything changed when Alexander received unexpected news. There were concerns about his position and the people around him. The life he had built was complicated, and not everyone understood the choices he was making now. The old Alexander would have responded immediately. He would have focused only on control and protecting his reputation. But this time, his first thought was different. Lily, Emily, his family, the people who had reminded him what truly mattered. Emily noticed the change in his expression when he returned home. Something happened, she said softly. Alexander looked at her. He wanted to say everything was fine. He wanted to pretend nothing could affect him. But he knew she could see through that. There are parts of my life that I wish I could keep away from you and Lily, he admitted. Emily remained calm. But you cannot spend your entire life hiding from the people you love. Those words stayed with him. Because they were true. For years, Alexander believed love meant keeping people at a distance. He believed separation was the only way to protect them. But Emily showed him something different. Sometimes, pushing people away was not protection. Sometimes, it was simply another kind of loneliness. That night, Alexander walked into Lily's room and found her asleep with one of her drawings beside her. He picked it up carefully. It was the same picture she had drawn before. 3 people holding hands under a bright sky. But this time, she had added something new. A small house with a heart above it. Alexander stared at the drawing for a long time. He finally understood what he was fighting for. Not a reputation. Not power. Not a world that feared him. He was fighting for the simple moments he never thought he deserved. And somewhere outside those peaceful walls, the world was beginning to notice that Alexander Romano was no longer the same man he used to be. The morning after Alexander Romano made his decision, the atmosphere inside the estate felt different. Not because the world outside had changed, but because the man inside the walls had changed. For years, Alexander had built his life around control. Every conversation had a purpose. Every decision had a calculation. He believed emotions created weaknesses and that distance was the only way to protect the people around him. But now, when he looked at Lily drawing pictures at the kitchen table and Emily preparing breakfast nearby, he realized something he had never understood before. A person could lose everything while trying so hard to protect it. Alexander spent the next few days making choices that surprised everyone around him. He started leaving his office earlier. He spent more time with Lily. He listened instead of simply giving instructions. To the people who only knew his reputation, it seemed impossible. But Emily understood. She knew he was not trying to prove anything to anyone. He was trying to become someone his daughter could be proud of. One afternoon, Lily found Alexander sitting quietly in the library. She climbed onto the chair beside him and placed a drawing on the desk. "What is this?" Alexander asked. Lily smiled. "It is you." He looked at the picture. It showed a tall man standing beneath a bright sky. "Why am I alone?" he asked. Lily tilted her head. "You were alone before. But now you have us." Alexander looked at the drawing, and those simple words stayed with him. Children had a way of seeing truths that adults spent years avoiding. Later that day, Emily found him in the garden holding the picture. "She understands more than people think," Emily said. Alexander smiled softly. "She understands more than I did." Emily sat beside him. "You know you do not have to become a completely different person, right?" Alexander looked at her. "What do you mean?" "You do not have to erase your past. You just have to decide what kind of person you want to be from now on." Those words reached him deeper than she realized. Because Alexander had spent so much time believing his past defined him. He thought the mistakes he made, the losses he experienced, and the walls he created were permanent parts of who he was. But Emily showed him that people were not trapped by the worst moments of their lives. They could choose what came next. That evening, Alexander gathered the people closest to him. He did not speak like a man demanding loyalty. He spoke like a man explaining a choice. He told them that his priorities had changed, that his family mattered more than appearances, that protecting what was important did not mean losing himself in the process. After the conversation ended, Alexander returned home and found Emily waiting in the hallway. "Was it difficult?" she asked. He nodded. "More than anything I have done before." Emily smiled gently. "Why?" Alexander looked toward Lily's room, where a small light was still glowing beneath the door. "Because for the first time, I had something worth changing for." Emily felt the weight of those words. She knew Alexander was still the same man with a complicated life and a powerful name. But now there was something different behind his eyes. There was hope. And for a man who had spent years living in darkness, hope was the most unfamiliar feeling of all. But neither of them knew that the biggest challenge was still waiting. Because when a person finally finds something precious, the greatest test is learning how far they are willing to go to keep it safe. The days after Alexander Romano chose his family over the expectations of his old life felt almost unreal. For the first time in years, he woke up with something to look forward to. Not meetings, not responsibilities, not the endless pressure of maintaining an image that had become heavier with every passing year. He woke up because Lily would knock on his door every morning and ask if he was ready for breakfast. A simple question, a small moment. But to Alexander, it meant everything. Emily Carter watched the transformation quietly. She saw the way Alexander smiled when Lily talked about her drawings. She saw the way he listened carefully to stories about school, even the little details most adults would ignore. She saw a man who had spent years believing he was too damaged to be part of a family slowly discovering that maybe he had always belonged there. But there was still one thing Alexander carried with him. A memory he rarely spoke about. A chapter of his life that explained why he had built so many walls around his heart. One evening, after Lily had gone to sleep, Emily found Alexander sitting alone in the living room. The lights were dim. The house was quiet. In his hands was an old photograph he had kept hidden away for years. Emily stopped when she saw his expression. It was not the confident face the world knew. It was the face of someone remembering a time before everything changed. "You do not have to talk about it if you do not want to," Emily said softly. Alexander looked at the photograph. "For a long time, I thought forgetting was the same as healing." Emily sat across from him. "And now?" He was silent for a moment. "Now I think maybe I was just running away." The honesty in his voice surprised her. Alexander Romano was someone who always seemed certain. But that night, he allowed himself to admit something he had never said before. He was tired of pretending he was untouched by the past. "I spent years thinking that if I kept everyone at a distance, nothing could hurt me again," he said. "But all I did was make myself alone." Emily looked at him with understanding. "Sometimes we build walls to protect ourselves, but then we forget how to open the door." Alexander looked toward the hallway where Lily's room was located. She opened it. Emily smiled. She did. The next morning, something unexpected happened. Lily walked into the kitchen holding two pieces of paper. One was an old drawing. The other was new. "Daddy, I made another one." Alexander looked at the picture. This time, it showed three people standing together. But above them was something different. A large heart drawn in bright colors. "What is this?" Alexander asked. Lily smiled. "A happy home." Alexander looked at the drawing for a long moment. He had spent years building a life that impressed everyone around him. But his daughter had shown him something much more important. A home was not a place with expensive walls. It was a place where someone waited for you. A place where someone knew your heart. And as Alexander looked at Emily and Lily, he realized he was no longer searching for something he had lost. He was finally protecting something he had found. The Romano estate no longer felt like a place built for one person. The long hallways that once carried only the sound of Alexander Romano's footsteps were now filled with laughter, small conversations, and memories that mattered more than anything money could buy. For the first time in years, Alexander did not feel like a visitor in his own home. He felt present. He felt needed. He felt loved. Lily continued to change every part of his world without even trying. She never asked about his reputation. She never cared about the things that made other people nervous around him. To her, he was simply Daddy. The person who read her stories at night. The person who listened to her endless questions. The person who always smiled when she ran into his arms. And Alexander realized that was the greatest gift anyone had ever given him. A chance to be seen for who he truly was. Emily noticed the difference too. She had met Alexander during the quietest and most difficult chapter of his life. She had seen the sadness behind his confidence and the loneliness behind his success. But now she saw something new. She saw peace. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind the trees surrounding the estate, Alexander and Emily stood in the garden while Lily played nearby. The air was calm. The world felt still. "I used to think I needed everything," Alexander said quietly. Emily looked at him. "What do you mean?" He looked toward the house. "I thought I needed more influence, more control. More reasons for people to respect me." He paused. "But all this time, I was missing the things that actually mattered." Emily smiled gently. "Sometimes people spend years searching for something they already had the ability to create." Alexander looked at her, understanding the meaning behind her words. He had spent so long believing his past was a permanent part of him. But Emily and Lily had shown him that people could change when they finally allowed themselves to feel again. That night, Alexander sat beside Lily before bedtime. She held her favorite stuffed rabbit and looked up at him. "Daddy," she asked, "are you happy now?" Alexander felt the question deeply. It was simple, honest, a question only a child could ask. He looked around the room, at the drawings on the walls, at the small reminders of the life they had built together. Then he smiled. "Yes, Lily, I am." She smiled back. "Good. Because you smile more now." Alexander laughed softly. It was a sound Emily had rarely heard before. A real laugh. The kind that came from a place untouched by fear. Later, standing outside Lily's room, Alexander watched the lights of the house glow warmly around him. The same mansion that once felt empty now felt alive. He understood something that had taken him years to learn. Power could make people respect you. Money could make life easier. But love was what made a person feel whole. Emily joined him in the hallway. "You know," she said, "Lily was right about you." Alexander looked at her. "About what?" Emily smiled. "That you were sad." But she also knew something else. "What was that?" "That you were still worth saving." Alexander looked toward his daughter's room and felt a quiet gratitude he could not explain. The man who once believed his heart had nothing left to give had discovered the truth. He was never empty. He was only waiting for the right people to remind him who he was. And in the end, the greatest change in Alexander Romano's life was not that he became a different man. It was that he finally became the man he was always meant to be.